discussion on an abundance of data. Elise is a wealth of knowledge in all things food rescue and data. She has experience leading very successful food rescues and is currently working in Syracuse, New York with the Onondaga Food Rescue Network, which has been a great partner and resource for us down in Cortland with Seven Valleys Food Rescue. She also has her own consulting business, Banana Box Consulting, and she will share with us how to use that abundance of data that we all have, but we need it for ourselves. So she's going to teach us how to do that. So Elise, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you all for being here and holding on through a long day of Zoom calls. I don't know about you all, but I was really glad to hear Karen Washington speak today. She was a bit of a balm on the soul given everything that's been going on. So I was really appreciative. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you don't have to just look at my face the whole time. And yeah, we can jump in and hopefully we'll have some time at the end for questions as well. So I'm chatting with you all about what to do with your abundance of data. And if you don't think you have an abundance of data, part of what I'm going to be doing is showing you where you do. So first off, just why am I the person talking to you today? So as Hannah mentioned, I've done a lot of food recovery. I formerly was the director of programs for FoodLink in Massachusetts, different than the FoodLink in Rochester that we heard some about from Feeding New York State. It is a food recovery organization. It's kind of medium-sized-ish. I started there when it was a startup, rescuing around 300,000 pounds, 400,000 pounds of food a year. And I was the second full-time staff member. Over my time there, we grew to 1.5 million pounds of food. And that major part of that was growth that we experienced during COVID. I moved out to Central New York a couple of years ago and started my own consulting firm called Banana Box Consulting, where I work with food security organizations, food recovery organizations, different organizations in the food system on strategy, program development, and measurement and evaluation. And I also locally coordinate the Onondaga Food Rescue Network. So that's a much smaller, very startup group that, you guys know what we do. You know food rescue. So I'm chatting with you because I believe the data can be really useful for food recovery. However, I know firsthand how fast our world moves and how hard it can be to tackle data or know what to do with it. So I'm hoping today to have a presentation that helps wrangle some of that and shows us some of the reasons to use it. So we're going to go through a number of steps here. We're going to talk about the why of data and your why of data, which I think is really important. We're going to talk about what kinds of data you may have, how you collect it, how you analyze it, a few best practice takeaways, and hopefully have some time for questions. So if you were in the last panel, you did hear some really compelling reasons for a why. That if you're working with Feeding New York State or donors that need a receipt, having data lets you report, lets you participate in these programs. But I think there's a lot more to why we collect data. You might also have funders that are asking you for information on what you do and who you serve. But Karen Washington this morning reminded us that we shouldn't be beholden to our funders or beholden to the programs that kind of oversee our programs. I think that when you do that with a data program, it kind of loses the interest, loses the motivation. And instead, I think you should start with your why. Why are you collecting data and what do you want to learn? Because the reality is there's a lot of information that you see on a regular basis that will help you make decisions in the future. It will give you compelling ways to tell your story, and it will help you understand your impact in the long term. So before you listen to what your funder wants you to report on or what Feeding New York State wants you to report on, First, think about what you need to learn to be able to tell your story and do your job. So, throughout this presentation, I'm going to walk us through a couple of examples that come from my experience running food recovery programs. Um, I've got some real world versions of them that we'll get to toward the end. But take a moment and think about your why. Why are you on this one other than it's the next thing in the agenda? What do you need to learn about your work um, to go forward? And feel free to drop that in the chat if you would like. But three of them that I'm going to work through today are our first example is a why could be your day to day decision making. You know that you need to get more food, but certain food recovery is more of a time suck than others. So you need more confidence in which donations you need to pursue hard versus the ones you let go. Another one could be long term planning. You know you're growing, you know you're going to need more staff or volunteers or storage in the future, but you don't know at what rate or how much. So your data can help you explore that. And a third one could be impact. You want to make sure that you're fulfilling a part of your mission. And you want to understand if you're working in line with your values. Your data can also help you do that. So moving into your food rescue data, I think it's really easy to only think about one particular piece of data when we talk about food rescue, the pounds of food that you get. And that is a vital one, and you're probably reporting at places, but you more than likely have a lot more data that's very useful for you than you realize. So I break up food rescue data into four main categories. We have donor data, so the data on who is donating that food. This could include things like the number of pickups that you have in a week or the number of pickups from a donor, who donated what kinds of food, what kinds of donators you work with. So are they big grocery stores? Are they restaurants? Are they caterers? But classifying your donors, how frequently they donate. Is it a regular thing? Is it a one-off thing? Do you get a lot of calls in the summer? Or maybe you work with caterers and it's a lot during event season. And what's your donation schedule? Are there days that are more busy than others? The second category of data is recipient data. So where are you taking your food? It could also include who that organization is and who they serve. Are they in a specific zip code? Are they focused on a certain community? How they use their food? Do they directly distribute it through a food pantry? Are they cooking meals, making boxes, making deliveries? How accessible are they? Do they have barriers in place? A means test of some sort. Is it a community fridge? You can think about that in many different ways. And what are their stories? The stories they tell you and the quotes they give you provide a lot of data on what you're doing. Food data is one of the more obvious ones. That's the pounds of food in and out. But it's also what type of food is it? There's different categories people use. Often people talk about produce versus meat versus dairy. It's why was that food donated? Is it overage? Is it shrink? Is it excess from an event? Is it farm gleaning? And another one I think is interesting is, did you store it and for how long? What does that mean about your operations? And final category of data that I go with is your logistics data. So this is who moved the food. Is it volunteers? Is it staff? How long did it take? How did they move it? Is it in a personal vehicle, a vehicle you own, by bicycle, by foot? And what are the stories that they collected along the way about how the pickup went or how the drop off went or what they're hearing? Because again, stories give you a lot of information. So going back to those examples that I gave us, When we're thinking about making day-to-day decisions, the kinds of data we might be looking at are things like the time you spent on a food recovery event, the time you spent organizing that too, the pounds of food you got, the type of food you got. So it's a little bit more like the bare bones. If we're thinking about long-term planning, we might be thinking about things like the total pounds per month that you had, or the total shifts per month, or the volunteer hours per month. And so you can see here that we're looking more at these stats, but bound by time. What does it look like over time in comparison to one another? And when we're thinking about impact, we're thinking more about those details and those stories. So maybe it's the types of food that are donated, or the types of agencies you work with, or the total pounds that you're sending to different places, what zip codes, things like that. And you're cutting the data up in multiple ways. So that's a lot. There's a lot of information here of many different kinds of data. So the question is, you might be looking at that going, well, where is that information for me? I know it exists, but how do I find it? And there are many different sizes, scales, and formality of food recovery organizations out there. So to a degree, it's going to be dictated by where you are at as an organization. But I think that the first place you always look is your logistics. There's some way as a food recovery organization that you are managing your logistics. And in that way that's probably where all your data is living that we can collect it from. So if you are a well-resourced organization, you might have a unique and purpose-built system, some kind of database, something in Salesforce, that you're using. And hopefully along the way, you thought about what metrics you want to collect. But even if you didn't, there's a lot you can harvest from there. A similar method, but one that's a little bit simpler because you're not building something from scratch, is you might be using a food rescue app. I know we've had folks from Meat on today, and that Christelle's talked about her food rescue app. But there's also a number of others: Food Rescue Hero, Food Rescue US, Readable, Chow Match Carrot. And all of them do an excellent job of tracking data and doing some light processing for you. And it's really then about understanding what you want to look at and how to cut it up. That's going to give you more information. Then there's what I call the cheap-ish way. It's cheap because you're not paying for software-ish because it's going to take more time, which is spreadsheets, having some kind of system that you've built in Excel or Google Sheets. And then there's the quote unquote fast way, because this is probably letting you do your work really fast, but maybe isn't giving you some long-term planning tools. But again, there is a lot of information. And this is the seat of your pants grassroots: calendars plus emails plus text plus pictures plus post-its plus it's in somebody's head. And I think that's, a lot of us live in that space, and there's nothing wrong with it. And I want you to understand you have data no matter what level you are in this process. It just might be easier or harder to access depending on what you're doing. So how do you access your data, and what do you do with it? So this is the part of the process of getting everything in one place, and it's also the annoying part of the process. Unfortunately, it is an incredibly important part of understanding your data and doing anything with it, and it can be time consuming. So one of the big things with this is that consistency matters. Whether you are using your own system, an app, spreadsheets, or post-it notes, collecting information in the same way across the board is going to give you the ability to do more with it. So that means if you are collecting things by category, say produce, meat, dairy, etc., you got to make sure that everyone who's writing down that information knows that, and you don't have someone who just writes juice box. because juice box is great, but what kind of juice box? Are we talking about a carton that's from the dairy section or something like that? So knowing how you want to classify your food would be one way. And creating those measurements that you want. And so you're going to figure out the measurements you want by knowing your why and why you want to collect them. So if you are collecting information if you want to understand the nutritional impact of your food, you're going to want to kind of create a few priorities of that, of like, does the details of the exact food item matter to us, or can we do a broader category? And that will help you figure out how to make consistent measurements. When you're preparing your data, I will say that an Excel, Google Sheet, or a CSV file is key. If you have an app or a database, you can shortcut some of this because some of the analysis you want to do will already be on there. But if you're doing a deeper dive into your data, you'll want to download it in one of these ways. If you are collecting your information, it's helpful to, from your post-it notes and emails, it may be helpful to sit down with some kind of data expert to come up with how you want to situate that spreadsheet and work with someone to put it together. I find that universities and a lot of companies are willing to donate their time to do this. I'm not going to pretend that that's actually a full time saver in the short term. You're going to have to sit with them and figure it out and give them access to things. But in the long term, if you can have someone help you create a system where your data is well categorized and you have some really clear parameters of how you enter it, it's going to make your life a lot easier in the long run. So in preparing your data, this often looks like some kind of project. Maybe it's something you do on a monthly basis, a yearly basis, once every 5 years, where you sit down and collect everything in one place and do some kind of analysis. So why would you want to analyze it? Well, hopefully you've thought of some whys, but there are a variety of different things you're going to do to analyze your data and learn from it. I'm going to dive deep into ones that have to do with decision making and impact, but I do want to first acknowledge there are some very common reasons we're going to be analyzing our data that are true for most nonprofits. So it's money and reports. It's reporting to funders. It's creating a year-end impact report so you can tell people all the great work you're doing and raise money. It's about doing grant applications. It's about communicating to your board how things are going through key performance indicators or other things that they care about. It's creating things for your marketing and social media and tracking against a strategic plan. These are all incredibly useful and valid reasons to work on data. But I think when we only focus on these, we end up being kind of in a drudgery because they may not have ready relevance to the day-to-day that we're experiencing when we're running around picking up pounds of food. So I want to go into some of the other ways you could use it, which are decision making. So this one, we'll spend a little bit more time on these things. I know I've run through a lot of information quickly. I'm excited and I'm talking fast. But that's good because I hope we have some time for questions and to work through issues folks are having. But the first analysis that I wanted to use as an example is in day-to-day decision making. So I mentioned that I currently coordinate the Onondaga Food Rescue Network. We're a very small food rescue project that's really been trying to find our footing. And over the last couple years, we've been finding that the big place that we are a value add in Onondaga County is through farm gleaning, doing harvests on farms to get fresh produce into the system, because that's a space that not many other people were working. And I won't go into all the the data analysis and information gathering that brought us there, that because that could be its own workshop. But it is bringing me to some new and interesting questions in how we recover food. So this past summer, we had two different opportunities where we gleaned berries, and they were really fun, but they were also incredibly time consuming. And it made me wonder how efficient they were and when I should say yes to that kind of thing and when I should say no. So what I did was I pulled up the data from the different food recovery events. And when I collect information on our food recovery, I collect pounds of food, the category of that food. I do make a note of what it was so that I have that for the future. I tracked how many volunteers showed up and how long we spent, and where the food went. So, with that information, I was able to look at the number of volunteer hours that were spent on this. I also do track a little bit of how much of my time it takes, but I didn't factor that one into this. The pounds of food we recovered and other parts, like some other notes on impact and story. And so, an um, easy little bit of math I could do was just divide the total pounds by the total volunteer hours. And that gave me an efficiency rate. How many pounds of food are we rescuing per an hour of time spent on this? And I discovered that we were only getting a half a pound of food per volunteer hour, which felt so small compared to like other things I know we do, like someone picking up a whole bunch of yogurt at Chobani and moving it around, which was like a 2-hour thing, but they had 500 pounds of yogurt. So just very different efficiency rates. But the thing about data is I don't think you can use it in a vacuum. That number is really important, but there's other reasons I might do a food recovery event. So I then also looked at what were some of the other impacts of this event. So one of them was a service berry gleaning that we did in city parks. The other one was at a blueberry farm. The service berry one got a whole bunch of new people interested in food rescue, people who were more interested in the foraging and local food aspect of it. The berry one exhausted everyone because the place was overgrown and we didn't have, and it was a really hot day. So it tells me that as an organizer, it's worth spending my time on things that build our mission in different ways, even when the efficiency isn't great. But that if I'm getting calls about things that have poor efficiency, I should really check what it's going to be like and how it's going to look before I go. So it gives me some data for the next time I get a call from a berry farm. Is it going to be a fun one that's going to make everyone excited about offering, or am I going to potentially alienate a volunteer with it? So that's one. That's kind of a day-to-day decision making that I looked back on. Another one is long-term planning. So I mentioned having worked for FoodLink out in Massachusetts. I actually still work with them as a consultant to do a number of strategy pieces and evaluation pieces for them. And one of the big things we've been working on this year is how to thoughtfully expand their program to meet growing need. And a big part of that is when and how do we expand their staffing pattern? And so to understand that, what we looked at was what their organization looked like over time. How did it grow? What is it looking like now compared to previous years? And so this is a chart that we've been using for years, but started to use it in a new way about their month over month food rescue program. So the bars show the amount of food rescued. The different colors are different categories of food, and the lines show these totals. So over time, we've recognized that they grow at a rate of somewhere between 10 and 20% per year. Um, so the blue line in there is their previous year's totals. And then the dotted line above it is a 20% growth rate. So if they grew at the regular kind of 20% this year, where would it be? So over the course of the year, we've been able to kind of watch where are where is that total line, which is now the dark green line this year, compared to that dotted line, their natural growth. And you can see that it's pretty consistently until last month higher than their 20% growth. And so that started to indicate to us that they needed to figure out how to increase their staffing and capacity because they were working with more than they were getting more than they were used to with their current staffing. So with that, we were able to do some longer term planning, start putting in grant applications, start making proposals to their board to help release that funding and figure out what the next chapter staffing model should be. And the final analysis I want to chat through is around impact. So this morning, Karen Washington talked a bit about, not just looking at the pounds of food in and out as impact, but what is this telling us about the greater system? And for me, personally, one of the reasons I'm inspired by food rescue work is that we are often working with very community-based programs that have low barriers and bring food to where people live. So when I'm thinking about the work I do, I often like to put it through that lens and see if I'm impacting those kinds of organizations more. So for example, one of the things I've been doing with NYFRN is looking at how many of our agencies are mutual aid or community fridge style or based within a low income housing community, and how much of our food are they getting. So to do that, I've classified my agencies in different ways. I look at the total pounds they get. I look at the value of that food and what the impact is on that community, and I collect stories and quotes along the way. And with that, I'm able to see right now, actually, by value, only 8% of the donations go to that space. And that tells me that maybe I want to up that, but also maybe I want to talk to those places about, well, what does that look like what does $2,000 look like compared to what else you're getting, what other supports you're getting? Maybe it's a really big impact, and that's a story I can tell, and they can't take more, or maybe we need more and they'll help me understand why. So you can see data in a lot of ways is just the entry to your next question, but it gives you a lot to go off of. So a few tips and tricks, takeaways on your data program. The first thing is, we've gone through a lot of different pieces. Start with your why is really the first one, but start with what you have. What's easy to understand? What is at your fingertips? You don't need to build a whole program out the gate for data analysis, because if you do, you also might start collecting the wrong things. So instead, start with what's in front of you. Another big tip that I give people is focus on periodic updates, not real time. If you are fortunate enough to have started using one of the apps out there or have a database, you might have real-time data, and that's awesome. Feel free to put that on your website or in social media. However, if you start to try to use that real-time data in some of your bigger storytelling, like maybe your grant applications or such, it gets harder and harder to track who you told what to and what time period it was about. So instead, I suggest creating a schedule for updates. I do like a big once a year update on food rescue data for the organizations I work with, where I do a bigger kind of dump on like, what did the year look like in review? And then I do monthly and quarterly updates on a couple different metrics. That way, we have consistency in messaging across the board. We're not saying one day that we rescued 1,500 pounds this month, and then the next day going, oops, sorry, we messed that up and we got 1,400. It gives you some points to make sure that your data is correct and that you don't have kind of cross lines in messaging. It also gives a nice moment to pause to see how things are going. And the final tip I have is build your system for the person who collects your data. I think it can be super exciting to like look at all this and be like, well, what could we learn? But if you don't involve your on the ground staff or volunteers in the data collection, in the planning process, you end up with systems that they won't report on. When I first started at FoodLink, we were starting using an app that had an online reporting system that we found was completely wrong for my volunteers. We were in Massachusetts. It was cold most of the year, or not most of the year, but cold on a lot of our food recovery events and rainy often. And asking them to pull their phone out with their big gloves on and try to put in a real time report didn't work. Instead, if I asked them to write it on a piece of note paper and drop it off with me when they dropped off the van, I actually got the data. So build something with them in mind and them as part of the process. So that was a lot, and we're getting to the end. If that felt like a lot, call me because I can help. But I want to jump into questions to see if we have any time.
We are right at time because we've got to get our next one started. But I will, if you're comfortable, I will share your email with participants and they can reach out. But thank you so much. I really like the angle on using it for your efficiency and what's worth your time because we all want to collect all the food we can, but it's not always possible. So thank you so much, Elise, for your time. We really
Yeah,
appreciate it. That was
no
very
problem.
helpful.